Good afternoon to all. I suppose you listen to me well. It is a pleasure for me and honor and a huge satisfaction to be here today. The truth is that almost every one of the hours that I have spent and I'm spending in Chile are for me a reason of great personal happiness. It is the second time that I visit this great country. For me, it is exciting to find you listen to this so perfect Castilian that seems just out of the University of Valladolid, and not only that, an exquisite education in all areas of the Castellanos. We are very people. I would not say I was going to be violent, not but very much forward. If not, we would not have conquered America. And the truth is that there are 11,000 kilometers that I have flown, and it is really something surprising that practically at the other end of the globe or earth that we find ourselves exactly the same or even better than at home. Thank you very much to Chile and the Chileans for welcoming us too, and also for the freedom and development, and especially as it could not be the couple that makes it, is to say to Carlos and Ania Cute Consuelo that, well, they have accompanied us. We have been together at multiple meetings when I was a young and strong man, and also because it produced me special satisfaction to challenge what the Andasagians say, is to say go challenging with radical ideas, not like now that I am a Tebio. And I remember that always Carlos looked at me with a certain smile of skepticism, but never the contrary, saying, well, this Jesus, to see if he calms down a little, etc., but always welcoming us as intimate friends. The truth is that when we did this, we went to this visit at the Montpellier a long time ago, that I do not go because I consider it a handful of Tibios, but the reason we were always looking to see where the Cases are because we already knew that there we had a family welcome. Is the truth that I am fortunate to have with Carlos Cases, and especially with any acute Concilio. And what am I going to talk about? Well, there is a reference that by references you already know that I am an intimate enemy of the School of Chicago in strictly scientific terms, and without the courage to offend. And I remember a legendary meeting with Milton Friedman that lasted 3 hours. The poor thing could not go because we were on the train and we were in the same department. We were walking. I do not know if it is that meeting of either the public health or the public health. And I started, I say here, I have Milton Friedman, this is my Nobel Prize in Economics, they just gave it to you. And I started Pam methodology, you have no idea Pam. And then it is curious because I thought this man is going to get up, he is going to get me. You are my friends, and you never say it in Chile. We in Castilla, every 2 by 3 he is going to kick me in the ass, and he is going to say, what is this, and who has believed this person who is impertinent, because I could not stand the 3 hours. The only thing he said every 5 minutes, he said with his mouthpiece, I remember, as if it were yesterday, he had a mouthpiece, Milton nonsense, Jesus nonsense, is what he said all the time, but he held on for 3 hours. But yes, I have to thank Milton Friedman for something that has been referred to that he wants to do, and it is that I'm 15 years old and already scourging the economy library of my father, who was one of the most complete in Spain, and I had also read all the books. All the important data fell into my hands. Capitalism and Freedom is an edition published by Editorial Real, that is the editor of the Opus in Spain, and I immediately emptied it already. But there is something that caught my attention, that is that right in the initial part in the preface, Milton from the past, here is where Milton betrayed himself. He referred that there were radical philosophers, that literally you can refer to the book to read it and put it in parentheses, hijack Mises, and this was mine. I said radicals, I am going to, for those I jumped the book, and I am going to for those, and that is the main reason why I came into contact with 15 years with the economy school. Was 16 I started the economy career, and I was lucky that my poor teacher was a positivist. I did not know anything about this. He recommended that book of Richard Lipsey, Positive Economy, and that book is something admirable. In the prologue, the author said that there was an approach to the economy that was radically the opposite of the author of the book to the famous Lipsey, and that approach is the approach of the praxeology in a deductive conception of the economy, due to, among others, Ludwig from Mises, and then added, which shows a great intellectual aperture of the author of the positivist work, said every economist in the economy must read the human reaction of Mises, and then look at me. I just saw in Capitalism and Freedom that reference to Mises And then, in the first economy course that I gave in my life by the hand of a neoclassical, forced me to study a book half written by literary positivists, but that from the beginning recognizes that there is another radically different approach to science of economic science that is provided by the Austrian school. This for me was a tremendous impulse that was also reinforced even more when the first year ended. They gave the Nobel Prize in Economics to Hayek. You cannot imagine the impulse that this supposed a whole year fighting with my professors at the university, and I have a lot of grip when it turns out that the course ends, and just at the beginning of the next Nobel Prize that I came insistently insisting Hayek, Mises, etc. It gave me a prestige between my colleagues. I repeat, 16 years, and a fear to my professors who said, I am sorry, I am very sorry. The talk between each other this year, it has touched you again in class. Well, this is simply an act, a small autobiographical detail to put in context a little the origin of how I came into contact with the Austrian school. Well, and then Carlos Casillas tells me that I did not know that I had to create a conference, but I did not care because I carry a catalogue of rules always prepared in case there was an event like this, and nothing better than talking, because if I am here today and in Chile, it is thanks to my direct disciple Victor Spinoza, that with the reason of the trip to which I have been invited to Argentina to receive a doctorate honoris causa by the ADDA, you know, is a university that was founded by another colleague of ours in the Montpellier Society, Alberto Benegas Lynch's son, and well then I will make you delighted. And then the president of the Argentine Republic, who is a very passionate person, as we all know, in some way extrapolates my academic passion in that political field. Sometimes it may be considered that with some excess, but hey, I think produce many credits from the personal point of view, but he is a great person. All the treatment that I have had with him is a person full of heart, is a person who is excited about anything. In the prize that we gave him, the Juan de Mora Prize of Mariana last June 21 in Madrid, in the Casino of Madrid. I do not know if you have had the opportunity to listen to or read the speech of the encomio last 14 minutes that I dedicated. I had in front of him with Karina, and I saw what his reactions to my words were. 2 minutes he literally started to cry, but with some tears. I have not seen a man cry so much. And then, as he is quite disheveled, he did not even have a handkerchief. In the end he had to escort with a climax, and he took away the tears, I tell you, so that you can a little realize a little of the character. But I would recommend, if you have the opinion that they put in Google, they put Javier Milei, or even in the separates her pieces, as they say here, that I have brought, because their speech is also written, and in the end I made him a special gift. I gave him a cyclopoil of 3 meters by 2, that with a Argentine band, that they took it with great difficulties, and that he has the position because in the residence of the olive trees is a personal gift from him, he says of his teacher Jesus Huerta de Soto, because apart from this he is a very generous person from the personal and intellectual point of view. From the personal point of view, he receives with open arms anyone who does not care what their origin is, even ideological or political. If he sees the truth and accepts with loyalty the ideas of freedom, he always receives them with open arms. But above all, he is a very generous person from the intellectual point of view, because on any occasion that he does not stop inviting his teachers to the Austrian School of Economics, and also to Hayek, to Mises, to the great Rothbard. He has from time to time some loyalty and makes some reference to Friedman, but hey, nobody is perfect, and a server when I remember that. I was in Mallorca sailing on my boat. We left the port portals, and I told the captain to get it out, and then I got on the boat to see the door of the sun, and at that moment they called me on the phone, and they told me he is citing my law in his possession. But what is this? As effectively there was the King of Spain, my law, and the first or second phrase he said is a quote to a server that I do not deserve. He said, as the great Professor Huerta de Soto, the help to poverty generates poverty. The only way to get out of Poverty is with more freedom. I say it as a simple sample button of the intellectual generosity of my law, but my law, what he recognizes above all, is that what changed his life is his contact with the Austrian School of Economics. He has explained on many occasions. I will not repeat here the concrete details of how this was carried out, but the truth is that my law is not a professional politician. My law is a professor of economics, and more, it is a professor of economics who has come to dominate perfectly even well the deepest gaps of the mainstream of the economy, of the general equilibrium of the macroeconomy, etc., of the set of reactionary and pseudoscientific currents that I referred to yesterday in my speech at the University of Development. That, by the way, I was impressed with the campus, the color, the day that you have prepared, Sunny, and the student. One thing spectacular. Well, he always recognizes that he saw the light, and well, he met his students, and with all the courage, because he told them, look, I have done a very important thing. Everything that I have taught you, and what I have taught the previous promotions in the past 20 years is all a lie from now. I will show you the truth, that it is the focus of the Austrian school that I say, so that you can see what character we are talking about, and what I am going to say now in a commentary plan. The truth is that it is quite provocative. I am going to explain what the scholastic roots of Javier Millei's thought are. If they allow me, that is what I am going to dedicate a few minutes, because I think it is highly suggestive, and in turn, for this reason, it allows me to give satisfaction to something that Don Carlos Casillas has asked me here, that done without using it, not like the old Castilla, Don and Dona. Don Carlos Casillas has asked me, man, it is convenient for you to explain a little what the Austrian approach consists of, because here we are all from Chicago. Well, don't worry, I understand that for historical reasons the influence of the Chicago school is very great in Chile, and it has also been very positive, because one thing is that one is completely wrong in their conceptual, methodological and analytical approach to economy, and another different thing is that he is a great lover and disseminator of economic freedom, as in fact it was Milton Friedman, and well, I think it is a divine blessing that, as a result of the famous blow, it will take responsibility for the economic responsibility of the country to people who had formed in that tradition of support for the economy of the market, and it is noticeable because there is a prosperity in a comparative country with respect to obvious Argentina, and this influence is noticeable, and that even later with the recovery of democracy in Chile in great measure, although I am not going to enter here in political details, because many of the well-oriented reforms have been maintained, and if they have been maintained, I suppose that in great measure it will be thanks to the effort of public policies that makes this institution so senior, and that today welcomes us well. But let's go to the heart of the matter, because someone will say, and what is this of the scholastic roots of Javier Millei's thought is even something that could question me and ask the same, because if I were here today, the first surpriser of my words this afternoon would be Javier Milei himself. But the truth is that little by little we go a little deeper. He should not surprise us in any way, because Millet himself recognizes that his change of paradigm and orientation and his main political impulse comes from defending with total conviction the ideas of freedom that are logical and natural consequences of his conversion to the scientific postures of the Austrian school of economics. And there is an article where Millet always cites that here he has had the very big influence of Professor Moore and Rodmer, that I met and had a lot of contact with him. Rodmer was well. It is practically indescribable, a sense of humor, an elucidation, an incomprehensible English of the low neighborhoods of Bronx. I think I was with him. The truth is that when I was young and I was with Javier, I was with Rodmer, I was not aware that later, after the years, I would look back and I would say, well, it is a legendary thing, not a thing that I could not think of. I could not think of the influence that I was going to have later. In the year 1974, there was a very important conference that suggested the resurgence of the Austrian school in the world. It also coincided with the year in which the Nobel Prize in Economics was held. That conference took place in South Royalton, and there, somehow all the intellectual forces dispersed from the Austrian school in the world were agglutinated, and with the motive of this Nobel Prize they said, well, so far we have come, we are going to give a scientific blow to the table and produce a paradigm shift in the world, and in that we are and Rodmer presented for this Congress an article entitled New Light on the Prehistory of the Austrian School, that is, a new light on the prehistory of the Austrian school, and the thesis of the book, the thesis of the article, it is published in a book, or the contributions, is that the origin of the Austrian school is found nothing more and nothing less than in the thought of the great members of Salamanca University of the century of Spanish gold, that is, from the end of the 16th century to the 17th century. These scholars gathered around the Salamanca University, also the University of Coimbra, and they went without knowing it, because they were basically cathedrals of civil law, theology, canonical law. They went without being aware of them, because they were economists of enormous value. Keep in mind that they were first-hand witnesses of unusual economic phenomena that had never been presented before, such as the effects that the massive flow of precious metals that arrived from America after the discovery, and that produced a tremendous revolution in prices. I like it more than revolution than the fact that it's life at the general level of prices, that is, it has a cross of the school of Chicago. It is not that the prices go up or down. What is a revolution? There is not a level of pull that goes up or down. There is a revolution, and this is important. They analyzed it, and they also analyzed it with a perspicacity. They analyzed it with an intellectual subtlety. It is the term that should be used, which is, reading it today, it surprises us, and well, there are various works that advance in this direction. For example, I am going to refer to the famous Marjorie Grace Hutchinson. This was a British high school student who married a German noble and daughter of a British lawyer. He lived all his life in Malaga. He knew perfectly Spanish, and he knew Latin, and then he wrote a small book about the school of Salamanca, Readings in Spanish Monetization, and published by Carnes Dompers in 1952. If I remember correctly, because I am improvising, and this research work was carried out by the Hayek direction. It is not a doctoral thesis when it is said that this is a mistake, but it was a research work directed by Hayek, because Hayek discovered that the origin of the economy of the market and the freedom of the company is not found in Scotland nor in northern England, much less in the Protestant or Calvinist thought, much less in the tradition of Adam Smith, who in any case underwent a perverse deviation in our discipline towards equilibrium and the objective theory of value, work serving as a tray for Marx to build the theory of exploitation. No, Hayek was convinced, especially of his deal with another colleague in the Montpellier Society, Bruno Leonic, that the origin of freedom, the origin of the dynamic conception of the market, is found in the thought of continental, Catholic, and Mediterranean origin fed by the school of Salamanca from the 16th century, and precisely to continue deepening in this line is why he supported Milei Rice Hutchinson in his research work, because that is what Rodber did. Rodber said, well, I am going to start from the work of Milei Rice Hutchinson, but I am going to see the rest of the key contributions of the school of Salamanca to see if they coincide or not, and in some way we can connect with the main contributions of the Austrian school. And he found that if they go like a ring to the finger under the origin of the Austrian school is found in the school of Salamanca, it is not surprising, because Spain was the empire that dominated all of Europe. Only France was isolated by all its borders by the Spanish forces, and it was also the intellectual center of Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, and the ideas flowed especially through Italy. The Italians are smarter than the Hungary. My direct disciple Bernardo Ferrero, my right hand at the University of Madrid, are German and an Italian, apart from my direct co-director Miguel Angel Alonso, who is also found, and other very brilliant professors. And then these ideas flowed and ended up influencing the eastern part of the Austrian Rhine Empire, which means Austria, precisely the Spanish Empire. The eastern part was Austria. Well, if you ask the Austrians, they focus on the reverse. They say that the Austrian Empire, the western part, was Spain. Of course, we are not going to enter with these discussions that have a secondary importance, and it is a tradition that ended up influencing Karl Menger, the official founder of the Austrian School of Economics, but soon you will investigate. You will see how he has quotes from the most important scholars. I have a letter from my Power from Hayek that he wrote to us for the organization of the first meeting of Montpellier in society that only accepts to have meetings in liberal and democratic environments, and therefore had to wait until the death of General Franco, and then we organized it, as you will remember. In the year 1900, I think it was 76-77, when we gave the doctorate in Salamanca to Hayek, etc. And there Hayek tells us that we have to be aware that the origin of the theory of the market is not found in the British thinkers or in Scotland, but it is a continental origin and Catholic. He mentions a work by Robertson and the work that we already say of Marjorie Grace Hutchinson, and adds that we also do not stop working on this article that I am commenting on the new light on the prehistory of the Austrian school written by Rothbard, and he says that, of course, it is very convincing everything that Rothbard says about it, and now we are going to enter it a little bit in fine, because of course if my law recognizes that the origin of what gives strength to your thought and conviction in the Austrian school, and it turns out that the origin of the Austrian school is in the thought of the scholastics of our Spanish golden century, because obviously now we understand the reason for the scholastic origin of the thought of Javier. And he always says that his first shock traumatic his conversion as the one of San Pablo. You know that he goes to San Pablo pursuing Jews, and suddenly the horse falls, and he says, hey, because I follow something similar to my law, and that conversion was when an article of 140 pages of Rothbard fell into his hands, demolishing all the neoclassical theory of Chicago about competition and monopoly. Then he said everything he taught was a lie. All this is wrong. All the anti-monopoly theory is wrong, and that is when that corresponding shock occurred, because the theory of competition, the theory of monopoly in general, the mainstream theory, of course, gives a static world of balance based on constancy and maximization, is what gives rise to the neoclassical paradigm that is one of the four pseudo-scientific and reactionary currents against freedom to which I referred yesterday, and it turns out that all part of the assumption that we can do with information that it is never possible that no social engineer or scientist can do with the same, because continuously the knowledge or the information that is generated in the market is never given, but it is continually being changed and new. Since we get up until we are to bed, we are always protagonist actors in our lives, and we continually discover new information about ends and means, so that the information, that knowledge is not given. And then our scholars, we have, for example, in the year 1645, it is asked, is it possible to get to know the price of equilibrium of things? This one that they give, of course, Rebecca to the School of Chicago mainstream, etc. It is possible to get to know the fair price of things, the price of equilibrium of things, he called it in Latin, and then he answers that it is so complex, the information that would be needed to to know what the price of equilibrium is, that it depends on such a large amount of circumstances that you can get to know the price of equilibrium, but only for God tell either the thought is finite. And then we have the other Spanish Jesuit cardinal, because in fact the thesis of New de Jail is that the origin of the economy of the market and the theory about the economy of the market is a Dominican, Catholic and Jesuit origin, neither Calvinist nor Protestant. This is a kind of annex, we say, street without exit, that has led to economic science until now. Another Jesuit cardinal, Soto, a little before 1627, is asked exactly, could the governor come to an agreement with all the information and knowledge that he needs to give a coordinated content to his mandates, and for example to discern if in a certain sector or industry, if it is that the concept of sector and industry could be objectively defined, there is a monopoly, because there is only one making a photo, and then as we know that it is the demand, and if it turns out that they are inelastic, the demand, etc., is being exported to the consumer. It is being assumed with a fatal arrogance the title of the last work of Hayek, that the great social engineer in front of the Department of Defense hereditary defense of the competition has information that can never arrive. It is possible that you can get to have this information, and Juan de Solis answers that information is so rich, abundant, and variable that you almost exactly understand and ponder of it is not hominid, that is to say, it getting it to understand and ponder exactly is only God's thing, but not of men, but we know that they are in God's hands, my colleagues of the mainstream, and the rest of the cultivators of the different reactive currents that were scientific. And there is another glorious thinker of the school of Salamanca also in this line that gives me need to explain a little what the Austrian school consists of against what we are used to. That is, everything that you have studied, everything that you have washed your brain, I have not studied before. That is, I know everything perfectly. It is all a lie. Do not have any doubts. We have the dynamic concept of competition, because what is a mockery is that a static model is explained. The static one is called competition, and for major in me, if it turns out that everyone does the same thing, see the same product, there is no separation or distinction or improvement from each other, and they are going to sell it at the same price to that of that competition, they qualify it for major. Me, all the perfect thing seems to be a lie. We have the great Louis de Molina, and Louis de Molina explains the dynamic concept of competition. A dynamic concept of competition, we give it to the scholastic, and the essence of the concept of competition understood as a process of rivalry between entrepreneurs, so that it is not a static photo that meets the optimal conditions that allows maximization as it is imagined in its permissive mind, that is, it imagined mathematics. Our dear colleague and distinguished economic man Gary Beckett, who conceived that the economy is and is only balance, constancy, maximization. No, we already knew for 300 years that this is not the case, because the competition, says Louis de Molina, they use a very interesting term, competition or competition. Competition says that it is a process of emulation between the entrepreneurs, between the providers who tend to lower the price, and I recommend that you read the book of Geronimo Castillo de Bobadilla, or another scholastic like The Glass of a Pine Tree is a manual for correctors written at the beginning of the 17th century. The correctors who will be the correctors were the local authorities, and then there were different manuals to teach them what they had to do to promote the order, etc. And Geronimo Castillo de Bobadilla writes, one of the best known, also writes in Spanish. I have an original edition, and there it explains how you have to organize the market so that it is spontaneous, it works well, etc., and it is perfectly enunciated. The law of competition is a dynamic process, as that according to what he has to achieve in the fair, the corrector. And remember the great Spanish fairs, there was a great Spanish fair every trimester, and the fairs were used to close the term of return of loans, or it changes the sale of the letters of change, etc. They are the great fair of Medina del Campo, or the fair of Medina del Rio Seco, or of Villalon, etc. While, so that in those fairs they have success, what the corrector needs is to comment that they go to them to sell the maximum of wheat sellers, etc., because as there is more suffering, more dynamic competition is generated, and this gives rise to a reduction in prices, because they have the clear idea. It is curious, if you choose the dictionary of the Spanish Royal Academy, that in reality is the Spanish Academy of all the Spanish American academies, although here you say Latin Americans give the same. We are going to discuss a secondary question, because the truth is that the exception of the correct exception of the Spanish language is that competition is a rivalry process. Listen to it. Do not define a static model of perfect competition, of balance and adjustment, but they do not stop here. The great contributions of the scholastic, but it is very important, the center of everything is in the subjective conception of value. Here the first most accurate and precise enunciation of what such a thing is, we must give it to the great Bishop of Segovia and Minister of Felipe Roman II Diego de Covarrubias and Leyva, for me especially do you, because in the official master's degree of economics of the Austrian school every year we organize a trip to Segovia. We put all the students on a bus Segovias, an hour from Madrid, and we all go in procession to the Cathedral of Segovia. I invite you to do it if you visit. If you want to take an 11,000-kilometer plane, do not leave Segovia, and in the Cathedral of Segovia, well, they have in a small chapel within date with the cloister there is buried the great Diego de Covarrubias and Leyva. We make a floral offering and a small prayer, considering that he is the founder of the subjective conception of the market and therefore of the Austrian economy, and they have Diego de Covarrubias and Leyva says that the value is something subjective that depends on the subjective appreciation of men. He calls it the common estimation, the common estimation of human beings. He says how he eat, even though such appreciation is crazy in the team. Insane is how he writes it. I am quoting from memory, but well, I have the first edition of the work, and one of the things that we do with all my students and take them and invite them to eat at my house. All of them go from 3 to 3. This is an improvised work that is put on my wife's back. The Chilean students are legendary for the amount of corn that they consume. I remember that Victor Espinosa ate 3 or 4 corn. Second place Sally's. If Victor ate 5 corn, Sally's ate 3 or 4. 1 less. But hey, my wife says, but for God's sake, how hungry these guys are. Well, then Diego de Covarrubias says that the value depends on a subjective creation that depends on the estimation of human beings, even if this estimation is crazy, and also puts the following example. He says in Latin, triticum wheat has exactly the same objective nature in Spain as in the Indians. Then he called it the Indians. He still called it America, and yet it is valued much more in America than in Spain. How can it be such a thing? He says, because they estimate it much more in America than in Spain. Among other reasons, the explanation of why that subjective estimation is different, it has influence, well, tastes, evaluations, relative scarcity, which takes care of the concept of scarcity for the Spanish. It is not an objectively discernible or measurable question from the outside, but it is also strictly subjective for Diego de Covarrubias, and this is a tradition that is the one that directly inherits the Austrian school of economics. We have the great tragedy of the Protestant deviation and the bifurcation towards the end without exit that we owe to Adam Smith. The truth is that what Adam Smith and his acolytes and successors was a tragedy for our discipline. There was a race of contributions that were already known as the subjective theory of value, the change in an objective theory according to which the value is something intrinsic to things and also already directly what was missing, that thinks that it is determined by the cost of production of things, and how the protagonist cost is the work incorporated by the theory of labor value that then Ricardo and company would expect to complete in a few words. He put all the Marx's theory of exploitation or plus failure, Carlos Marx and successors, for really me. When I associate it with that, I stopped going. I found colleagues all very proud, generally in the sergeants, because they are some chauvinists. I was not going to tell him about the Carrojo with his ties to the Smith, presuming of liberals. To me, I always wanted to take off the tie and hand them directly his tie, but how can you take a tie to the Smith being in front of the Spanish scholars, and also for a person who has never left without leaving our discipline? But it is not only that, it is even more serious than the Smith, because it makes a table of the objective that the scholars had to try to explain how the price is determined at every moment in the market, and he only looks methodologically, conceptually, in trying to explain a hypothetical natural price in the long term of equilibrium, that is to say the price of equilibrium, that is to say it is also opening the door to the whole modelization of equilibrium that would later be completely sterile economic science, and it does not matter to me that it is in its version of partial equilibrium or of general equilibrium. How quiet I am there, saying that for Spain, the pro-Spain with inferiority complex black legend we have be martyred in America, the Spain of the Inquisition, the dark Spain in front of the lights of the Protestant world. We were always capybara, and yet now we discovered that the origin of the market of freedom and the correct economy is our own country. We must be very proud. It is really exciting, and that has been my scientific message throughout the ages, and I have to say that I'm very proud because I have spoken of intellectual chauvinism in the context of the English language economy. The truth is that it is the most extremist, the most imperialist, and the worst of all, but there is also French chauvinism, so that we can talk about it. But not many years ago it was published by Paris de la Université de France, the most important university editorial in public France, also an encyclopedia of the history of liberalism in Europe, and for me one of the reasons for the greatest professional satisfaction as an academic was that I was in charge of the introductory chapter. I wrote it recognizing nothing more and nothing less than the France of the French Revolution. In the revolution, the god of reason, a cradle of socialism and so on, was not the cradle of liberalism, but that the cradle of liberalism is found in the Catholic thought of our school children of the golden century. Slap the French, who at least had the humility to recognize it, something that the Englishmen have not done until now. But of course, is not only subject to value. There is another extraordinary scholastic, is Louis Sarabia de la Calle. The great success of Louis Sarabia de la Calle is that he writes in Latin Spanish, and his work is entitled Instruction for Merchants, is the way as it was then called to the businessmen, these very sharp scientists of the economy, or economists without knowing about them. In reality, they develop all their manuals with the purpose of being able to equate what activities that the merchants developed were listed, and which were listed, and therefore if they committed a sin in their case, to orient in the corresponding penance. Well, if you read the work of Louis Sarabia de la Calle, you will realize that following this doctrine of the subjective theory of value is the first one that perfectly articulates that market prices are the ones that determine the costs, and not the other way around, as all the theories of balance, Chicago, mainstream, etc. The model of equilibrium coincides with prices and costs, and then they give the completely unjustified leap of thinking that it is the cost that determine the prices, following a vulgar intuition of the small merchant type or store of Margaret Thatcher that receives a commodity with a cost. He adds a markup and then he puts it there as a skin price, and then it seems that it does have a certain logic that it is the costs that determine the prices, because no certain Louis Sarabia de la Calle says that it is not the costs that determine the prices. He says that neither the costs nor the jobs nor the risks that the commodity makes determine the price, but that the price is determined by the subjective evaluation. But it is also that it is obvious that we have to make schools. The millions that we spend in departments in making obtuse books and paying teachers poor teachers. I am not going to criticize if the teachers are normal people, and our only historical defect is that we only teach what we know. We are not able to ask for pairs to the horn. But what is the point of saying that it is the costs that determine the prices, and the costs that determine the prices, no merit or difficulty, we have the business activity in a market? We would simply put costs, work, etc., and we would have to guarantee the recovery of prices. There is something there that does not fit. It seems like a lie. It seems like a lie. How? The sense of our discipline has disappeared because of that kind of inferiority complex that we have with the natural scientific world, and of wanting to create and form social engineers. Really claims heaven. The state of our discipline is really incredible that in the 21st century we still have this. We have to make a revolution in the discipline. This was mine small contribution that I made. I do not know if a message would arrive to receive or not completely. Well, by the way, Louis Sarabia de la Calle died traveling from Gabon, from Spain to America, and of course he was buried, as he does, by throwing his body to the Atlantic Ocean. There is a great Argentine thinker of economic history of Roman origin who is called Ospopsky. Ospopsky is especially mandatory because he has investigated something That was also obvious. It turns out that many of these scholars embarked on and were the foundations of the first great universities that were established in America by the Spaniards, San Marcos de Lima in Mexico, etc., and what Ospopes who has done is follow the track of these thinkers and find subjectivist scholars and who understood the relationship in precious and cost, but already writing in America such as Wanda Mash. So I am quoting from Memoria or Albornoz. I recommend that you read the works of Ors Popescu because it is already the direct connection with you who are here, but they do not stop here. The contributions of the Salamanca school that have influenced and are the foundation or the foundations of the Austrian school, but I have left the subject of monetary theory, which is more important because you have the great doctrine of Alvaro Martín de Soto. For me very dear because his cousin brother who is Juan de Astorqueta who in charge of the rents of our farm, Mr. Eo de Sari de Nevra, paid this day at the University of Paris de San Francisco Javier. In fact, that was what convinced your grandfather to have the farm. They offered him 3 wonderful farms, and this was disgusting, full of farts. You could not do anything with it, but here is a letter in which it is shown that with the rent of this farm, the studies of San Francisco Javier were funded, and your grandfather said directly the control and the conversion of a camel and these guests. If you go to Spain, and you will be really surprised, it is a farm of a small man of 1,200 hectares, but in the north they have almost taken the Basque country, because it is really spectacular, and with whose income the studies were paid. It is known as Mr. Eo de Saria in Puente de la Reina is the Camino de Santiago, 20 kilometers southeast of Pamplona. So Martin de Astorqueta is the one who articulates very well the quantitative theory of money, that is, they do not confirm the equation of exchange. It is not how we go in time, but I have a limited capacity. I still have to give myself 10. In reality, he does not discover the quantitative theory of money, but he discovers it in Copernicus or the Copernicus article a few years earlier in his work of monetary quidinta and a ratio, but the article with details by Martin de Astorqueta that says that where money bounds, the price of money falls, and therefore the value of things, hands, works, etc. is much higher. And he says that the price of things in Spain is much higher than in France or Germany. In fact, the second law that determines if we are facing a good economist, this is also important. Hayek best test of a good economist. This is one of my scientific articles. Hayek has written that the best test to discover if we are facing a good economist or not is if he understands the idea that demand for commodities is not demand for labor. That is to say that the increase in the demand is given in any way and increases employment, but it is the reverse. It is one that would take a little time, but one of the logical consequences of the Austrian theory of capital. But the second law, the second test of a good economist, is the return of the other, which is to understand that the increase in the amount of money never produces prosperity, and it is also a poisoned gift, and it is what happened in Spain because it turned my country into an area in a single. It was so expensive, everything, that it was not competitive. The most interesting thing was to import all the products from France and Italy, and they broke all the small companies, art, health, agriculture, etc. In Spain, there were no Spanish young people left. Nothing more than 3 exits: church, getting an ecclesiastical benefit; sea, crossing the ocean, making a fortune in the Americas; or a royal house, serving the king in the third. And so my country has been a royal and a developed country until practically yesterday because of the poisoned gift of monetary growth. And see if they find out in the European Central Bank and in the Federal Reserve with the artificial party and what they have injected us. But that concept of money has a real fund, that is this, but it goes through the most important thing, and it is that the monetary injection never produces modifications in the price range, but completely disarticulates the structure of relative prices. By the way, I am wrong, or I see that in London answer to the great Rolf Luder. A very big hug will never be forgotten. The session in which you submitted 25 years ago, come to and so on, that I call you the Bloobers. They had me waiting there, the brightest minds of the school of Chicago 25, and then I had strength, not like now that I am upside down and then come to ask for at least you had. 4 hours in the end I arrived dead hungry and dehydrated to the university. I thank you for the test, and we are also going to give a very important applause to Don Ross. Hey Ross, this is appreciated that I have had 2 retina dispensaries. They have put some lenses of the last generation, and my eye doctor told me you are going to see perfectly. And I look at myself, but if it has gone to Ross Luder, nothing has changed. This is the same as 25 years ago. I am very glad that you have had the gentleness to come and listen to me, and the things that manifest is that there is an essential difference between the deposit contract and the loan contract, and one thing is to deposit and another thing is to lend, and that a great crime is committed if the one who says a deposit of a flexible good is appropriate for him for any purpose, be it wheat, oil, or especially the flexible good for the environment is the money. Here you have the delicious analysis of U's Arrivée de la Cal that also has an incipient and embryonic theory of the economic cycle, and it shows how, although it is everywhere when the banks appropriate create bank money gives place to prosperity only in the short term, it is reverted and everything goes to the end. As Tomás de Mercado or Domingo de Soto said, there is implicit the Austrian theory of the cycle, and there is also a direct connection with Javier Milei, because one of the objectives of Javier Milei is to close the central bank and idolize it. As you know, very difficult. It is against everyone, that is, his team as logical central bank with which we talk mostly does not want to be given here, and all the private bank to participate in the income is to expose the citizenship with a lordship that supposes the creation of bank money. All the international organizations find, because if this reform is done and it has success, I would have it clear that the entire financial system that has all the instability that it continually generates is evident that the deposits are part of the offer would not be exactly the same as the money in effect. Louis Dubliner called the chirographies pecuniary office money when they make a seat fraudulent. The banks today legitimated. I am not going to say that they are going to jail alone with deposit charge. They are creating deposits from nothing. Fiduciary means or perfect monetary substitutes, which has an effect on the same as the massive flow of money, that is, his second law of Soto's roundabout gift that leads to long-term poverty. What a tragedy it is that this great discovery of the scholastic of our golden century was completely forgotten, and that 300 years later, when the debate between the Carlin's school, the school of monetary, and the bank and the school at the end triumphs, the sensibility of the analysis of the school and the banking law of People's Bank Act 19, February 1844, the obligation of the coefficient of the 100% cash is established, but what a pity only for the issuance of paper currency, one of the forms of the fiduciary media, as it had been forgotten then that the deposits are exactly the same as paper currency did not demand the same for the issuance of deposits at sight, and then it was a scientific triumph. But it was a victory, because the only thing that the banks did from then is to redirect their business from the issuance of paper currency to the issuance of deposits. Continue the bubble cycles. Crisis was completely disregarded. The law every time there was a banking crisis, it would have to be an exception, a last ditch. This was created, which was the Bank of England gave the privilege to intimidate paper money to save the troubles of the banks, and many people who know what it means and the tragedy that it means, the bankruptcy of a bank, especially for the depositors, and so on until today. It is incredible that the entire Western financial system and the world of the so-called market economies have its origin in that something was forgotten that had already been discovered in the scholastic in the golden century, that deposits were part of the monetary supply exactly the same as paper money, and that private banks, when they act with fractional reserves, create virtual money that completely generates bad investments and puts the seeds of deep economic cycles and an instability that is self-dependent, such as drugs, such as statism, that in turn justifies the state, and so on. And finish. Thanks to finish, because Carlos, the person who's getting nervous, and also because it is often the other when you take the rail, and that which now I am a bit of a struggle to move you, because maybe you do not know when I can finish, and it turned out that the famous motorcycle of my Law is also of scholastic origin. Take the bottle. Carrasco is of scholastic origin, and here we have the great Juan de Mariana the Father. Juan de Mariana, who was the legitimate son of a cleric from the Cathedral of Toledo. Then he did not aborted the sin of the flesh, and we are weak that it is going to be even. The clerics aborted us, and then what was done was that he took them to the child, and took them to a family where he had the son, etc. The son came out more ready than hungry. He entered the order of the Jesuits, who came from catechism teaching in Paris, and then he ordered in an agenda of the Jesuits, an order that was created then. The son of a lot of novelty with respect to the Dominicans in Toledo. The father, Juan, great father Juan de Mariana, has a great work that is titled Treated on the Diseases of the Company. And what company is that? The company of Jesus. And what Juan de Mariana says that company cannot work because it is created in a hierarchical way from top to bottom, following a military scheme orders, and says that it is crazy that the blind is the one who is up there, who wants to guide the one who sees, even when the one who sees is crooked because he lacks the first-hand information, that he loses it, and says that when the laws are many and in too much hand, you can not even know all the respect is lost, and forcefully it is loaded, it falls into many holes. I am quoting literally number of pages of legislation printed in our country last year. 1,350,000 pages for all public administrations, 47% of them inspired by the European Union. That what you have to do on the bike and load all this regulation. But where it has been seen, the father Juan de Mariana already said it, and fortunately it has created a ministerial mellow, which it is said that man is 1,000 social deregulation. Little by little it is pruning this terrible spider. But hey, I suppose that you who have first-hand knowledge of what happens in Chile, it will be something very similar, but you also have to put the bike close to public spending. I return to Father Juan de Mariana says that what is the only solution to reduce public spending, because the king has so many pensions, he dispensed subsidies, etc., that you cannot support the public company, and especially if it turns out that you want to finance by doing inflation. We are going to talk right away, and then what you have to do, reduce public spending, and especially put the accent, says, and do not get into unnecessary wars. I say now that in Europe the neocons have come out from under the stones. I do not get out of my amazement with the bellicose. You cannot imagine. We are going to spend 510 million in reacting to the Permax, but the man has seen this. But if the other is not necessary at all, but if when the communism fell, what does the other look like, unless for the fact that they are in the other side of Europe, and we have always been neutral in all the wars. Do not put you in trouble. Ukraine and all the countries are threatened by Putin have all my sympathies, but if it turns out that you have a neighbor who is a little crazy, one, first take it well with him, and second, arm yourself to the teeth, and with very close friends arm yourself a lot, but do not put us in trouble to the Spaniards, and that we do not paint anything in that often that our only geopolitical risk is the cities of Utah Melilla that expressly are excluded from the Treaty of the Ottoman. That is, if Morocco wanted to threaten it, the Ottoman would not defend it. It is a small pathophysicist example that has its origin in the scholastic of our century. Do not get involved in unnecessary wars. And let's go back to my law, because it has another great work, Father Juan de Mariana. Quasi tucho de monitor y mutations traducida al catalano con breve tratado sobre la monda de Milan qua al presente labra en Castilla y de otros desórdenes y abusos y alja explica perfectamente qua el embellecimiento de la monda que se va levando a cabo Felipe Roman III a través de su válido adjunto loma quita plota multiplicar el número de unidades monetarias es un proceso inflacionario que no conoce el término entonces y dice que eso equivale a un impuesto y que es el impuesto más perverso porque es el impuesto que más daño hace especialmente a los más pobres y vulnerables y que además que es un acto de tordicidio porque es un impuesto que se impone de manera subrepticia y sin la autorización de los gobernados perfectamente y desarrolla en su obra de regis institutions sobre el rey de institución real que le encarga Felipe II como manual para formar a futuro unas instrucciones o consejos para su hijo y el desarrollo en la teoría del tordicidio dice que no solo es lícito sino que es una obligación asesinar al tirano y entonces describe Coles Son las características del terreno y una de ellas es característica típica del terreno. Estamos impuestos en el consentimiento de los ciudadanos lo cual está carísimo gente. Una cosa con la otra que cualquier persona que algo inflación participa en la inflación sí. El gobierno si presidente del Banco Central si hay un power si cristiano la comida. Lo mismo que responsable o parlamentario que de alguna manera justifica esa inflación. Y en si via monetización del decidio público o mantener a los banqueros provendarios que acción con cifra de reserva fraccionaria sanrios del delito de de decidio. Importante que corta destella que de sin embargo. Esto es lo que dicen nuestros escolásticos sin embargo, Milei es mucho más generoso solo. I propuesto no de corta la que de por Dios no demos crear un delito imprescriptible no time. Ustedes uno de los lecciones o proyectos que he repartido por el que se declarario. Delito imprescriptible monetiza el déficit público esa inflación si presaria y ingresarían en prisión todos los responsables imprescriptible es que si luego ganaron los kirchneristas y de job de ese delito no poseen por cuando ganaron los otros si volverio. A poner activa y todos a la punita casa luego entonces hemos avanzado mucho y tenemos y congratularnos de la gran misericordia y justificación que ha sentido Milei. El pensamiento de los esclásicos del siglo de oro y termina ahora termino de verdad. Lo que muy poca gente sabe que cuando Thomas Jefferson y los grandes padres de la patria americana están dilucidando si se levantan o no contra su rey natural rey de Inglaterra Jefferson. En cuanto a su inspiración en nuestros escolásticos Jefferson era un enamorado del Quijote Jefferson.
Es muy afortunado Jefferson porque el capitán Stevens en el año 1699 traduce al inglés.
Se estudió a fondo todas las obras del padre Juan de Mariana y especialmente la historia de España del padre Juan de Mariana es una historia escrita desde la persecución de la oposición entre la libertad y la coacción en la que se caracteriza de terrenos y por tanto los que había creado la menor a los grandes terrenos la covas de la historia Filipido. Nestonia Alejandro Magno Julio César Napoleón todos y entonces es muy afortunado. Jefferson Pork el Capitán Stevens en el año 1699 traduce al inglés la historia de España del padre Juan de Mariana por cierto tengo muy cosa la primera edición inglés traducida por el Capitán Stevens de la historia de España y Jefferson estatuto documentado en viasas. Melodedores a comprar todos los ejemplos creen que en Europa de expedición inglesa y los entrega con una corta medicina y sus compañeros lee esto y una vez que estudian la tradición de nuestros escolásticos se deciden que tienen plena justificación y legitimidad. Desde el punto de vista del derecho natural para levantarse contra el rey tirano inglés luego. El origen de los EU de América se encuentra también en nuestros escolásticos del siglo de oro español yo estoy contento y encantado si no fuera porque no quiero abuse a nadie de la paciencia de ustedes y del nerviosismo del moderado pero yo les pido cantata que mi trova otro hora y media porque tengo aquí en el tintero y por cierto he tenido que improvisar. Todo esto porque yo no sabía que tenía que dar una conferencia me encanta estos desafíos. Recuerden ustedes que mi abuelo era bandolero de Juan Belmont aquí no tienen. Canidas de toros no bueno pues un toro es como si me explicara ustedes como una locomotora. Con que unos y de grandes en el que tienes tu que a pilo en teco a torilo ponen. Una banderilla y luego matarlo directamente y terminé y con esto termina mi conferencia. Hoy comparando a Javier Milei gran animalista como saben ustedes o si que si hay que mata un animal Milei tiene más o menos sustitutas verdad que si no pues comparando a Javier Milei como un toro de ser en España toro es poco menos de ser que uno. Es un hero por razones obvias y el toro que hoy nos toca y es nuestra responsabilidad. Moralidad y mata el toro es el estado muchas gracias. Bueno, muchas gracias Jess por la conferencia que sin lugar a dudas a perspectiva. Abre vos caminos y no cable me ayuda qua la colaboración qua hace Jesus en lo que es. Al pensamiento económico da una ilustración de caminos de seguir en el orden social que llamamos el orden económico habiendo leído alguno de los separatos que me envió Jesus en preparación de esta reunión voy a tocar primero que nota el tema del Banco Central por habiendo sido presidente del Banco Central y teniendo al frente un consejero del Banco Central creo de ser interesante conocer una opinión tu y también que nos pudiera señalar como es el proceso de transición te comento entiendo que aquí en Chile tenemos un Banco Central autónomo independiente establecido la Constitución Política del Estado aprobado al año 1980 establece la presencia de un Banco Central autónomo independiente y la única misión en la estabilidad de precios integrado por un Consejo de 5 personas están elegidas por el Parlamento y luego definidas por el Presidente de la República durante en su cargo que son inamovibles durante un periodo de 10 años y si robando renovando uno cada 2 años pero tiene un aspecto intern que probablemente se conoce poco y mi juicio es un elemento diferenciador de otros bancos. Centros al Banco Central está prohibido entregar el recurso de crédito al Estado salvo una sola excepción una ocasión de guerra previamente calificada por el Consejo de Seguridad Nacional o si hay una muralla una defensa para efectos de evitar que el financiamiento los déficits fiscales sea previsto por el Banco Central la pregunta que T. Queer formulada la existencia de esta institución durante 35 años ha cumplido su función prepared la estabilidad de precios y la cumplido con mucho éxito como sería el proceso de transición de un banco y establecido una sociedad económica en la que no se da la presencia del Banco Central en primer me parece admirable tu país y que haya sido tan serios institucionalmente la primera cosa reconoce lo segundo no seis ilusos. Vamos a ver no penséis que hay un tribunal constitucional independiente inamovible to use. Los tribunales constitucionales del mundo están nombrados por el ejecutivo y hay diferencias de grado pero dependen no hay separación de poderes tal cosa es imposible. To ser en la constitución de la Moneda Única Europea del Euro se establece exactamente la absoluta independencia y que bajo ningún concepto se podrá financiar nunca y que el objetivo es el de estabilidad de las tres cosas y esa fue la condición por la que aceptan los alemanes tenemos aquí abandonado su corrido marco y pasa al euro los tres han sido traicionados si dais no es que se emite de público y la compramos eso no es monetizar. Aunque que lo es esto es simplemente una política monetaria y el al tribunal supremo de los de la Unión Europea y lo aceptan y laga últimamente acaba de bajar al 0,25% time prohibido el objetivo nada más es estabilidad monetaria ha bajado al 25% y lo argumenta de la siguiente manera obviamente con el plan la economía en Europa está muy tristona y hay que sepa pero si esto está prohibido por la Constitución. Puede decir que hecha la ley hecha la trampa por tanto solamente países tan serios y tan probos solamente en países tan serios y tan probos como en Chile que considera que esto funciona medianamente pero eso es la única excepción en el mundo y a otra cuestión la transición. Voy a decir la transición que es muy sencilla y es para dolarizar es relativamente más fácil. Porque la que explico yo mi libro es para pasar al patrón europeo con cohesión de código 100%. Presidente de Argentina ha conseguido un préstamo del Fondo Monetario Internacional de 15.000 millones 12.000 de entrega inmediata y 3.000 dentro de poco tiene un swap de 6.000 millones con China 15.621 préstamos de Banco Morgan etc. otros 5.6.000 millones más 6.000 que tiene la total 37.000 millones de dólares que tiene en este momento put cambio peso dólar de toda la base monetaria ampliada pero inmediatamente mañana. No es suficiente porque también tiene que cambiar la parte de los depositos a la vista. Generados por la banca privada la verdad es que el sistema bancario argentino está muy poco desarrollado por razones obvias de la hiperinflación, pero ahora en este momento en el que digamos, con esta rebaja del 25% del gasto público y el superávit que se ha conseguido pues, en relativo sentimiento de prosperidad la gente está empezando a pedir préstamos a la banca y gran tragedia la banca se está acomodando mediante expansión crediticia que para que antes eso pero cara que intenta a los políticos en este momento y con elecciones en noviembre no lo va para poder luego a cortísimo plazo un enfriamiento de economía cuando no la vendría bien supongo yo no he hablado con mi ley y no sé exactamente lo que piensa pero seguro que para aquivan los tiros al acto de Bounce tremendo de salir del superpartialmente pero bueno sobre para las personas chicas. La semana pasada hice un paso muy bueno en la buena dirección y termino por esto. Que estoy diciendo veo exactamente igual para que lo vis en Chile y bien Fisher estables un sistema de transición en los años 30 para pasar al constante de cogitación portion. En lo que concibís que se emite por el Estado de los dólares necesarios y se comprenden los activos de la banca para obligarlos continuación que el dinero que perciben. Que está realizado como coeficiente al 100% de los depósitos a la vista. El problema de esta transición de Ivan Fisher es que equivale a nacionalizar la economía. Yo tengo un sistema de transición totalmente super al de Ivan Fisher en función del mercado libre que lo que es rarísimo lo que yo propongo es crear el dinero necesario y entregárselo a los bancos como colateral de los depósitos a la vista. Luego veremos que son los depósitos a la vista porque incluyen los depósitos a corto plazo hasta un plazo determinado digamos. Un mes pero esto es otro tema digamos secundario en el momento en que se haga. Eso no es inflacionario porque de este realizado es dinero como coeficiente al 100%. Y simplemente reconoce la realidad de que los medios fiduciarios o sustitutos monetarios perfectos creados secularmente por la banca que opera con esa fraccionaria son dinero y una vez que los dejes consolidados queda protegidos de los activos monetarios de los depositantes en los bancos pero que es lo que pasa al hacer esto quedan liberados. Todos los activos de la banca que actualmente lucen como colateral de los depósitos y lo que proponen servidores titularizarlos en unos fondos gestionados por la propia banca. Y congelados por los títulos de deuda pública dicho de reforma los miles de millones de dólares que le faltan para cambiar de la pesa al 100% incluyendo los depósitos y los tienen simplemente con la operación Huerta de Soto descrita en el capítulo 9 de mi libro. Y siempre digo lo siguiente a un servidor de medida del primer 90 económicos. Literalmente imposible porque no soy políticamente correcto pero añado entre paréntesis que para Dios no hay nada imposible si un servidor de medida del primer 90 economía serie por esto. Substituye si lo llevará mi ley a la práctica y además os lo servo en bandeja por podéis. Hace lo mismo vosotros que tenéis una economía mucho más desarrollada un sistema financiero. Como veo mucho más serio y podéis hacer al que cuales el único problema es que sales. Malaga y te meet en Malagon hamba te meet en el dólar y eso es pero bueno estamos en el área dólar como un primer o un segundo paso es seria libertad de elección de mundos y luego eventualmente hacer el que por señores yo destaco es algo muy cosa hasta que viuvo y sin provecho con dos cosas una con este. Que es un crucifijo y otro con mi mundo de que es mi criptomundo lo único en lo que creo. En la Iglesia Católica representa la calidad del amo y libertad son inseparables days. Caritas es de si tú no puedes amar a alguien y que eso implica violencia o te cura mucho. Es pobre y entonces a punto de pistola y de quitar otro para que te lo denota el amor. Y la libertad son inseparables Dios nos ha creado su imagen y semejanza por amor y libres por Dios es libertad el reino de Dios si dais que no es de este mundo pero Nada de que he que do al Cesar lo que del Cesar y adios lo que is de dias port del. Cesar no is nada y el reino de Dios ya halagado ya lo tenemos y va acaba con los reinos de este mundo porque Dios es libertario y also humano está credo e imagen y semejanza de Dios. Segunda pregunta hay que estaba vinculada con un paper que le escrito por supuesto en que deja mai juicio algunas interrogantes que me interesaría si los pudiera que solo una de señales totalmente lo siguiente es posible impulsar al desmantelamiento del Estado con las enseñanzas de la ciencia económica y agregas y esta para mí es lo importante incluso la justicia el orden público y la prevención represión y sanción del delito se dan proporcionadas por los procesos de mercado basados en la cooperación voluntaria sin lucro. Ayudas que esta preguntas y fundamentalmente que mano esta que tú califica como el orden espontáneo puede resolver los temas principalmente vinculados con la justicia y con la horda un puro no pues más sencillo porque la justicia es un sistema para resolver los conflictos de los particulares y equity que tenemos de primer mano indicios de como funcionaria en un mercado libre protagonizado por los seres humanos de paz y con la capacidad inmensa de la creatividad humana empresarial para solucionar los problemas sabemos lo que es el arbitrage y cómo funciona el arbitrage en cuanto a la prevención represión y sanción del delito no yo no sé en Chile pero es que las empresas privadas de seguridad en España nos defienden a todos, incluyendo al gobierno y a los ministerios estamos hablando securitas etc. Obviamente no podemos saber las soluciones concretas que dará al mercado para los problemas y los desafíos que vamos implantando si lo superamos o no serio. Conocimiento de mañana sino este hay pero tenemos en deseo de por donde irían las solutions y lo que podemos estar seguros es que sería un sistema mucho más eficiente. Barato y sabotaje moral porque reducir al mínimo la cocción esta de que cada uno. Porque si consideran que los casos son públicos y que puede donde estime conveniente esta en una sociedad civilizada donde se ha visto todos los casos irían privados o serían organizations have que conseguir un permiso etc. y la gente lo pasa es que como estamos con el cerebro lavado por el Estado y además estamos acostumbrados a que bienes que consideramos esenciales como hospitales, orden público, etc. los proporciona al Estado. Pensamos si identificamos que el Estado es igualmente necesario porque pensamos con un automatismo erróneo que si no existiera el Estado no tendríamos ni hospitales ni calles. No hay justicia ni seguridad y claro que los tendremos y no voy a hablar aquí de todos los esfuerzos de científicos que han hecho los anarcocapitalistas que conservan un entramado de agencias privadas como compañías de seguro. Lo digo porque yo soy el propietario de una y se escribiré a cada uno a esa agencia de seguridad cada uno de ellos patrocinaria un sistema jurídico determinado unos más católicos otros no otros LGTBI etc. y se ocupan de defender y solucionar los conflictos y que posee un conflicto entre una agencia y otra y que posee mai hija secreta embarazada de crear aborto y en mi agencia no se permite y entonces mi hija crea a esa otra agencia donde se permite como es lógico no lo habían a punto de pistola y se viola al principio de una agresión que es la esencia de la libertad y entonces ellos se cambiaría de agencia y que va a haber una guerra entre las agencias. Son muy costosas preferme la guerra en un acuerdo de tipo contractual entre ellos que solucionarían a priori esas cosas señores no tengan ninguna duda primero. La base de la tecnología va a favor de la anarquía de propiedad privada del anarcocapitalismo. Y segundo siempre un mundo que ni siquiera podemos imaginar la riqueza y la prosperidad no de 8.0 de 80,000 millones de seres humanos y 800,000 millones de seres humanos en un entorno de libertad. Luego yo sé que es muy difícil porque hemos vivido todo la vida en este entorno y pensamos que es lo natural pero es lo más creativo de ser. Gracias a sus otros alcances que está vinculado con toque en varios aspectos de separada al temontian de la Iglesia Católica que eleva toca un tema que se normalmente teniendo aspectos vinculados con la Iglesia Católica que es el concepto de bien común y Es concepto de bien común fundamentado en cuatro principios fundamentales: el principio de la solidaridad, el principio de la subsidiariedad, el principio de la participación, el principio de la sociabilidad. La pregunta concreta va en la siguiente dirección: dentro de un orden espontáneo, ¿cómo calificas tú, cómo configuras tú es concepto de bien común y qué importancia le das estos principios que sustentan una sociedad que tiene como misión la búsqueda del bien común? La máxima importancia, pero es que falta uno el más importante. Y vin una doctora y la dicen esto Jesús escribiendo en el suelo haciendos al despistado. Hemos cogido es en adulterio flagrante y que pasó y Moisés nos manda pedrila. Y sigue escribiendo que hacemos y al final. A ver que el que no haya pecado coja la prima piedra y la tiene el principio. Que te falta para el bien común es el principio de no agresión. Jamás se utiliza la violencia ahora. Si tú me dices que esos for principios magníficos pueden justificar coger a punta de pistola uno para decirlo otro, entonces no hay bien común. El bien común solo lo genera la economía de mercado, el orden espontáneo de mercado, la libertad y el sistema capitalista. Eso es el bien común y nada más. Estamos de lucha por que fortalecido muy recientemente al ley de nuestro Papa Francisco. Y rezamos por él y estamos tranquilos porque Dios es tan infinitamente misericordioso que incluso los pecados y los más graves los perdona. Y en segundo lugar, estando como está seguro en el cielo, resultado de esa infinita misericordia, habrá podido ver por primera vez con total claridad que la mejor manera de defender a los pobres vulnerables y desalidos a los que tanto queer y Jews queremos es a través de la economía del mercado, el sistema capitalista y la libertad de empresas. Siguiendo con la idea de estos principios fundamentales y probablemente habrá que agregar es principio elaborado por Jesús de Soto vinculado con el principio de la subsidiariedad y el principio de la solidaridad. Normalmente se colocan como elementos antagónicos y otros ven esto como elementos complementarios cual serie tu apreciación dentro de un orden social, como llegan al principio de la subsidiariedad y el principio de la solidaridad. Bueno, la subsidiariedad do por supuesto que existe en estado y por lo menos como si conveis que solo intervenga cuando la sociedad civil de forma autónoma no ha podido solucionar el problema. Bueno, digamos que esta es una manera de cambiar el tiempo. Pero mi idea de la solidaridad la explica muy bien en John Pablo II de Solidum esto. Fin de una cadena que tiene un eslabón unido con otro dice que el mejor modelo de solidaridad es la economía del mercado que pone en contacto a todos con todos y todos. Salimos ganando incluso no solo los próximos la ayuda al próximo sino ayuda al que no. Siquiera llegamos a que no se refiere concretamente, creo que es en los números 45. 46 de centésimos años o la cadena sin límite de solidaridad que supone al mercado, lo que yo el mensaje yo quiero enviar es un mensaje de primo, un mensaje de optimismo. Si es que tenemos la verdad en encoger la ciencia, encoger la ética, encoger la religión, etc. Tenemos que hacer mucha formación dentro de la Iglesia Católica para pobrecerlo. Los clérigos que no saben hemos editado un libro escrito por los discípulos míos del Opus que se titula Economía para sacerdotes. No sé si lo habéis recibido aquí hemos vendido miles y miles. Vamos, yo estoy distribuyendo a todos los sacerdotes de España que son 14,000. Explicándoles esto porque están todos los días en el púlpito pidiendo siempre por nuestros gobernantes para que Papa Estado descubra todos los problemas, desilumina y nos ayude. A los demás que nos tenéis que pedir por eso coño que lo que tenéis que pedir es por los seres humanos de pie para que seamos capaces de descubrir los desarrollos sociales, las oportunidades de ganancia que hay y acumula capital es lo que favos a los más vulnerables y esto no están en los preces de la Conferencia Episcopal Española. Supongo que tampoco en la de Chile si es que queda algún después de la limpia. Del bien como ven ustedes, el tío del lugar es muy importante y la ironía castellana también. Otro comentario: Jesús al año 2023 un investigador de libertad y desarrollo. Los de Miguel Ordonet elaboró un documento que se denominó el Dialmo Liberal Defender los Principios o lega al consenso preguntaque es valida los acontecimientos políticos que surgen en un régimen de democracia representativa buscar el consenso o defender las ideas bueno. Es que vamos a ver al liberalismo bueno para empezar yo de ser liberal aquí en esto. Precisamente hace 25 años en una ría de la Montpellier Roman 6 las como sem pueblo. Salvo las distancias, y mi diciendo que el liberalismo aparte ser pecado como dice. El padre rippled en el clásico catecismo español es una marca nada no sé si lo de marca nada en Chile y además es científicamente imposible el liberalismo clásico lever. Dentro de sí mismo la semilla de su propia destrucción una vez que acepta la existencia del estado onxi mínimo es imposible limitar su crecimiento si algo hemos contribuido. Los técnicos de la economía es a demostrar a través de la escuela de elección pública. Y otros que es imposible limitar que crezca es decir el liberalismo como proyecto político. Ha fracasado sin embargo hay que decir que la gran revolución liberal de nuestros mayores, empezando por José de San Martín, gran padre de la patria también de Chile pero etc. No se levanta contra el antiguo régimen que era la monarquía española nosotros bien y además con éxito y los constitucionalistas liberales etc. les debimos mucho pero lo sobre todo si queremos ser leales a su lo que nos entregaron al testigo que nos entregaron debimos de reconocer que la continuación natural y legítima del liberalismo que nos defendieron esto en la revolución anarcocapitalista que tenemos que impulsar no nos pedimos quitar diciendo las mismas cosas que hace 200 años pero contesta tu pregunta al libertadismo que no. Liberalismo y que yo defiendo no es un consenso, no es un talante de respeto de ninguna manera es simplemente renunciar al ejercicio de la coacción y de la violencia nada más pero como es lógico. Esto saben que cada uno puede probar su estilo de vida como es inconveniente pero no saben que yo estilos de vida que considero profundamente inmoral es no puedo utilizar pacíficos para denunciar los y es mi obligación luego nada de consensus nada de. Donde yo entiendo que la tradición constitucional democrática liberal vital y respetuosa mine. Todo esto estamos en otro paradigma, estamos en el paradigma de las redes sociales y en el paradigma de la verdad en es consenso de talante si leven algo al ogro los que hemos. Britain y la democracia en que se ha convertido obviamente es un sistema perverso basado en la mentira y en la compra de votos con dinero robado mediante impuestos y con esta situación. Estamos situación de supervivencia nuestra misión es defender las ideas con total puridad y sin hacer ninguna confusión en el mundo de las ideas y eso sí sin ejercer. Nunca la violencia ni la amenaza de violencia física y si yo creo que tiene el mérito de mi ley es precisamente triunfal en la materia de las ideas no importa lo que pasa en la Argentina. Y al final triunfo no yo deseo lo mejor a sus vecinos y la verdad es que es mi meditorio lo que se ha logrado hasta ahora pero mi ley ha triunfado. Porque es emocionante no se puede usted ni imaginar la gente juvenil amino. Anarcocapitalismo que era una cosa desconocida es mundo común en la cal en España en Francia en Italia en todo el mundo no sé si en Chile y la gente juvenil cada vez los familiarizados con los obras de Miser Robert Haig Mayan como decimos en España terminología. Torina y está autor en la posa y es imparable y aquellos que siguen incluidos en el cine del respeto constitucional etc. hamba claro estamos en el tono democrático. Habrá votaciones y elecciones pero no dejes de denunciar sin ceder ni unapis el era. Ali don si incuente esa es mi recomendación luego por tanto de al final pues vamos a ver. El anarcocapitalista tendrá que llegar a acuerdos con los liberales clásicos bienvenidos. Son los pasos en la buena dirección liberalizadora si consigues convencer de que una ley si menos mala bienvenidos si el anarcocapitalista no se queda y sabe que el objetivo es seguir adelante y si con su empeño en el objetivo final por si tu vas en plan suavticamente al terreno y brillantemente metimos no sé si estaré de acuerdo conmigo no pero colas si nota y tal vez muchísimo que hayas dedicado tu semana santa en vez de rezar y poseen a mis artículos si los anecdotes los manda no fui como penitencia. Y quero famora una ultima pregunta es resultalo que tocas también mucho el tema de lo cual lomas tu la función empresarial es interesante la relación que haces entre la ética y la eficiencia creo que valdría la pena cuidado en que estamos en un régimen de economía de mercado y vivimos entendiendo la necesidad de que al lado de la eficiencia del comportamiento ético de los actos de la economía de mercado y apreciación de esta. Más importante que ética y eficiencia son dos dimensiones distintas que admiten combinaciones. Variables es una de los excrescentes peores de la economía neoclásica en general y de la moda economía del bienestar en particular ellos consideran un mundo de hallazgos perfectos si considera el óptimo parcial que es la eficiencia estática si estás en alguno de los puntos de las curvas de posibilidades máximas de producción y luego de cuidado consumos en habría una hipotética función de bienestar social que requiere la idea de lo que es justo o injusto. Y existirían múltiples posibilidades de intersección para combinar como si quisiera diferentes combinaciones de eficiencia y justicia de esto es una cagada intelectual. Y en hermostuoso por parte de esa concepción estática del concepto de eficiencia parcial, que yo sustituido con el concepto de eficiencia dinámica. La eficiencia dinámica de uno mis libros más famosos de Theory of Dynamic Efficiency publicado por Radolj y que recomiendo. Estudios la eficiencia dinámica es al revés concebe que un sistema en sí mono uno. Empresa es más eficiente conforme más impulsa la creatividad empresarial en libertad y la coordinación entonces cambia radicalmente al asunto y si queremos entrar en el fango del instrumental analítico neoclásico diríamos que más lo relevante no es estar en la curva de posibilidades máximas de producción sino que gracias a la creatividad cada vez no hayamos hacia futuro pero si es que no existe cosa como puedo que en pensar pero bueno. Incluso yo caigo en el pecado y tener a ver que potencias me voy a confesar podré pecado. Durante unos segundos utilizado el instrumental analítico y neoclásico Hegel mil podres. Nuestros y reza etc. es o peor de los pecados que conseguido bien entonces con la concepción dinámica del mercado que tiene sabajos clásicos resulta que ya no eficiencia. Y justicia no son dos dimensiones distintas sino que son dos caras de la misma moneda. Porque solo una idea de la justicia solo la justicia correctamente entendida como el respeto a la propiedad privada general la eficiencia dinámica de manera que lo justo divided bien. Entendido no puede ser nunca ineficient y al revés lo efficient no puede ser justo y. Uno de los principales errores dentro del ámbito de la Iglesia Católica en general, del Papa Francisco que en paz descanse en particular es el de considerar que el derecho de propiedad no está muy bien pero es un derecho secundario no es un derecho prioritario, sino que todos los recursos están hechos por Dios para todos los hombres eso es un gravísimo error por parte de desconocer la naturaleza creativa que conque nos ha creado Dios a su imagen y semejanza pero afortunadamente Francisco ha visto las huellas de los nuestros. Voy a terminar esta sesión cantando una ley que hemos vivido con su Huerta y Soto. Analizamos el título de la conferencia que le pedimos a Jesús hoy de la tarde. Le mandamos en WhatsApp, le colocamos el título que nosotros sugerimos que era política económica y la escuela austriaca me contesta su Huerta de esos prefiero un título más radical anarco-capitalismo y la escuela austriaca le contestamos nosotros de libertad.